Welcome to the final session. I think we've had a good day today. We've talked about the fight for women's bodily autonomy and the struggle specifically in Iran. Around that is also, as well as hearing from LGBTQ comrades fighting for their autonomy and rights. And obviously the last session was a very good discussion with Özlem and Michael about the British political economy and the situation in this country. The final session is going to be on ecosocialism. So anti-capitalist resistance has been in existence for only around 2 years now. This is our first kind of big hybrid event for people to come in person as well as online. There's a number of people online as well who have joined us. And from the very beginning of our organization, one of the core beliefs was ecosocialism. That was a very important political viewpoint and strategic idea that the different constituent groups and individuals who came together to form anti-capitalist resistance thought was very important to make sure that was something that we really prioritized, that we talked about it. And obviously, we are also working with comrades across the world, in particular also in the Fourth International, who have for a great many years now been talking about ecosocialism and the importance of trying to articulate a vision of a socialist future, which is one which is sustainable with the planet, and kind of breaking with the old productivist, Stalinist way of seeing socialism and thinking about eco-socialism as healing the metabolic rift and creating a society in which all our needs are met, but also within the framework of what the planet can provide. So we've got two excellent speakers to round us off. We've got Christine, who is one of the comrades of the Nouvelle Party Anticapitaliste in France. And we've got our own Rob, who is joining us from sunny Tamworth to talk about some of the struggles going on in this country as well. Before I bring those speakers in, though, I just want to mention two comrades who we recently lost. Neil Faulkner, who was one of the founders of the organizer of anti-capitalist resistance, and I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with his work, not just on the TV show Time Team, but also his work as a Marxist historian and a general archaeologist. Obviously, his death earlier in the year was a huge blow to us. And also, we lost another comrade this year, Sarah Parker, who was a comrade, long-standing Marxist, who was particularly involved in solidarity with the Kurdish struggle. Was very interested in, building links between British socialists or, socialists in this country and the fight for, obviously, people's rights across the Middle East, but in particular the Kurdish comrades. So it's tragic, obviously, to lose comrades. Every member is precious. Every socialist who's fighting for a better world is precious. And it's in their spirit and their struggle that we want to host meetings like this. We want to build our organization. We want to have a positive contribution on the left in England and Wales, where we organize, and also internationally as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Christine, who is joining us from France. I will remove myself as spotlight. Can you highlight? Actually, I can do it. It's okay. Christine.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello. Shall I begin?
Yes, we're ready for you. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, I have to say that I'm very, very happy to be with you today. I have to apologize for my poor English, and I do want to send you very, very warm salutation from my comrades of NEPA. Well, the question is why we need ecosocialism, and indeed we need. Today, the lives of hundreds of millions of people are ruined by floods, mega fires, extreme heat waves, hurricanes, and so on. And with, I can say, only 1.2 degrees of warming. And warming, global warming, is the most global phenomenon, but it's not the only one. A sixth, species extinction is threatened. Deforestation is exploding. Plastic waste contaminates oceans, soils, food, and water. Water is lacking for the basic needs of the poorest population. Oceans are polluted, acidified, and warmed. The melting of the ice cap threatens to submerge coastal regions and towns, and so on and so forth. But these disasters are not natural disasters. They are the result of the extraction of more and more coal, gas, and oil. They are the result of the grabbing and pollution of more and more land and water. The result of the release of more and more greenhouse gases, waste, and pollutants. And all those more and more have a name, and the name is productivism. And they have a responsible, and the responsible is the capitalist system. Many warning over the past 50 years, but nothing really changed. Greenhouse gases emission continue to rise. The world's leader and the big capitalist groups first denied the existence of climate change and the responsibility of fossil fuels. Some of them continue. Also, most of them put forward false solutions, such as, well, nuclear power, which is preferred by French state, as you know, carbon sequestration technology, so-called nature-based solutions, which are industrial forest plantations, and offset mechanism that grabs the land and forest in global south to balance emissions that go on more and more in the north. Because the only solutions they can imagine are solutions that turn ecosystems into commodities, solutions that rely on market mechanism and competition to solve the problem. But it's the competition itself between capitalists that leads them to produce more and more. And that is the root of climate change. Ecological devastation are not separated from the class struggle. They worsen the effects of neoliberal policies on the poorest. The number of people suffering from hunger in the world is increasing. A quarter of humanity lacks water. More and more people have to migrate, to leave their homes, to find asylum in other countries. And I want to say that they find refuge in neighboring countries, because migration is, first of all, regional and very marginal from the south to the north, in the contrary of what all the racists claim. Meanwhile, the richest continue to destroy the planet, emitting up to 2,000 or 3,000 times more carbon dioxide than the poorest in the poorest country. We know that in order to defend their privileges, the ruling classes are ready to use the more authoritarian policies. The worsening of ecological devastation may lead them to even more brutal, racist, and sexist policies. The danger of fascism is real. Faced with these terrible threats, for many people, it's easier to envisage the end of the world rather than the end of capitalism. For us, the capitalist system is responsible for social and ecological destruction catastrophe. It's urgent to overthrow it. It's urgent to make a revolution to stop this destructive system and build another society that we call eco-socialist. Why eco-socialist? Eco-socialist because socialist is not enough. It's not enough because the experience of the 20th century shows that the country's so-called real socialism did not represent an alternative to the productivist destruction of environment, and worse, they contributed to it. It's not enough because there will be no emancipation on a dead planet. It's not enough because today, the struggle to satisfy real social needs and the struggle to preserve and repair ecosystems are intimately linked. We need eco-socialism because we need a program of demands, a strategy for struggle, and a project for society. Our enemies are on the offensive, and it's not enough to say one solution, eco-socialist revolution, to convince people we know. It's necessary to bridge the gap between immediate demand and the perspective of the overthrow of capitalism. We need a program of demands which, taken separately, are not necessarily revolutionary, but which, in their global coherence, do imply a break with the system. But this program must start with the real and physical situation. And this situation is the absolute need to reduce greenhouse gas emission. And this requires a radical reduction in the use of fossil fuels, which are responsible for these emissions. This radical emission cannot be achieved by simply replacing coal, gas, and oil with renewable energy. We need to build another system, and its construction requires energy. The sun and wind and so on exist in unlimited quantities, but the material needed to use them are limited. So it's necessary to reduce final energy consumption and therefore to reduce material production and transport. This reduction must be global, but it does not concern everyone in the same way. To respect climate justice, the richest 1% must divide its emission by 30, while the poorest 50% can multiply them by 3. So the aim of our program is to live a better life while producing, transporting, working less, but sharing more. For our strategy, it's based on existing mobilization. And today, peasants, youth, indigenous people are on the front line of the mass mobilization against extractivist project. While the vast majority of workers are quite absent or very few in this struggle. And it's a decisive challenge to gain the participation of workers' movement by linking employment, working conditions, workers' rights, and the preservation of ecosystems and the climate. Women are the majority in the mobilization. Firstly, because they are on the front line, because they are responsible for 80% of the world's agricultural food production, and because they are assigned to repair the effect on humans of the poisoning and destruction of ecosystems. Women's important place underlines the articulation between social, environmental, feminist, but also internationalist and anti-racist struggle in the same fight for emancipation. And about the project of society, despite we are in very global, very defensive situation, there are many and important struggles, but their conclusion depends on the strength of emancipatory perspective. We must contribute to building a new hegemony, an eco-socialist hegemony. The challenge goes far beyond the crisis in the functioning of ecosystem. It's a global crisis of human civilization. This deep crisis of meaning and values undermines society and causes great social and individual suffering. For many people, the society doesn't make sense. The production of goods is not related to real needs. Work is meaningless. Social tiers are devastated by the competition of all against all. To make sense again, it's necessary to replace the production of goods with the production of use value, to determine democratically what needs these use values should satisfy and how, to place at the center of this democratic deliberation the care of human, the care of ecosystem, the carefully respect of the living. This need to eliminate unnecessary production and transport and to refund all the production and social reproduction activities. Furthermore, it's about giving priority to being rather than having, about changing deeply, about developing a new vision of the world, a new culture that develops the value of respect, care, and caution, a new culture of our relationship between human and with the rest of nature. All that is what we call ecosocialism. Thank you.
No. Thank you, Christine. That was very good. Excellent. Right. Our next speaker is Rob. I'm trying to find Rob on the. Oh, okay.
Sorry, it's a second.
No, Rob, don't go. You're due to speak. He's gone.
No. I'm letting the dog out of the room so we don't have a dog in a dog incident.
The consensus here is we want the dog.
Yes. Okay, well, I'll start with an apology. I've got a really rotten cold, so I'll just make a few sort of broad points to set the scene. But actually, Christine has said much of what I was going to say in very similar terms. So she's fantastic. I'm glad we're both singing from the same hymn sheet on this. So consider what I say as positive reinforcement of what Christine has just said. I would start with, the fact is it's really good to see that the ecological dimension has already been brought into the discussion in several sessions this weekend. That's great because it needs to be a thread that runs through everything we do, not just when we're talking about the environment specifically. What do we mean by ecosocialism? Simon mentioned, Stalinist productivism. I want to start with a quote that predates Stalinism. This is from Sylvia Pankhurst writing in 1920, and I saw it the other day. Under communism, all shall satisfy their material needs without stint or measure from the common storehouse according to their desires. Everyone will be able to have whatever he or she desires. The abundant production now possible, and which invention will constantly facilitate, will remove any need for rationing or any limiting of consumption. That's a fantastic vision. It's really inspiring, and you can find similar quotes in Marx and other 20th century socialists, etc. But that's really a 20th century program for a planet with fewer than 2 billion people, before the mass production of cars and consumer goods and fridges and computers and mobile phones and obsolescence built into goods. It's before advertising, this false generation of wants, before mass consumerism in the global north, which has led to ever greater accumulation of things and more resources. And with that, colossal amounts of waste. 100 years later, it's clear that we're coming up against planetary limits and hitting those buffers. And again, Christine outlined those. I'll do that again. It's not just about anthropogenic climate change, rapid global heating. That's the kind of flagship, isn't it? That's the most immediate and existential. But, biodiversity is threatened with extinction. 50% of species are threatened with extinction. We're living through the 6th mass extinction of life on Earth. Extinctions are running at 1,000 times the natural background rate. And, that's comparable to the asteroid that walloped the dinosaurs, but in slow motion, with whole ecosystems built up over thousands of years now collapsing. Resource depletion, scarcity of metals and minerals, water stress. 1 in 6 people, rely on glacial water. The glaciers are retreating, deserts are returning. That will, as I said, lead to mass migration, which is already starting to happen. Land use, currently over 40% of land is used for agriculture, crops, and also even more so for livestock. And we still see the Amazon and other forests being cleared for this. And finally, very pertinently, pandemics of animal-derived diseases, as COVID, SARS, many others, driven by a combination of encroachment onto new areas of the natural world and intensive animal agriculture. So all adds up to a very toxic picture. And that's where, so in terms of building socialism, I'm reminded again of a Marx quote, which I'm using completely out of context. People make their own history, but not in conditions of their choosing. It'd be lovely to live in a unlimited, unfettered kind of, environment where we could have absolutely anything we want by waving a magic wand. The sort of premise of fully automated luxury communism, which at the end boils down to a bit of wishful thinking about finding another planet where we can mine and asset strip for our own. That's not where we are. We want to build a socialist society, just an equal society. We have to recognize the limits, live in harmony with the natural world. And that means we have to reformulate the terms of the debate around growth. So I'm not going to go into detail about that, but yeah, we emphasize growth in the quality of life. I mean, the earliest iterations of the workers' movement were concerned with health, education, reduction of the working day, greater leisure time, as much as factory conditions and wages. And these are all things that have been, part of our movement since the beginning of capitalism. But we need to re-emphasize those, quality of life, increase in leisure time, rather than growth in quantity of things and consumer goods. But we need to also talk about, collective social provision rather than privatized individuals, everybody wanting their own little car, and not even sharing that car with a neighbor. So we need to talk about democratic planning for real needs, not artificially generated needs, but the real needs of a community by democratic planning at the grassroots. Within this, one good thing is that with the development of productive forces we have now, we can ensure a massive transfer of wealth, skills and technologies to the global south, enabling developing nations to leap over a lot of stages we've been through. You can have electrification of public transport. You don't have to have gone through decades of fossil fuel high stage of mass land clearing, cattle rearing and factory farming first. We used to say that our program was to make the reds greener and the greens redder, but I think that's far too modest. We have to go a lot further than that. Ecosocialism has to be a red and green thread running through everything we do, central to everything we do. And not just at the theoretical level, but at the practical. So in all the various campaigns we're involved in, it can be easy sometimes to raise eco demands as solutions in some campaigns. The cost of living crisis is a great example. It's very quickly grasped as a common sense idea to say, let's nationalize the gas and electricity industries in order to reduce bills and in order to invest in renewables and reduce carbon. The two things go hand in hand. Similar with strikes in public transport, we can very easily raise agitational demands saying, yes, we support the workers, we support paying the workers a decent wage. We also want a massive expansion in publicly owned rail and bus services, cheap, high quality, joined up services which make the abandoning of the private car, petrol, diesel or electric car, a real possibility. We want to see workers and service users involved in a just transition across all sectors, and we need to make use of workers' skills and knowledge of their jobs to facilitate that. So we think in Britain of the Lucas Plan of the 1970s and discussions around alternative production. That's a good model to popularise within the movement, and it's the sort of things we've started to raise in and through Extinction Rebellion trade unionists, for example. Other comrades will have many more examples of how we can raise eco-socialist ideas within campaigns in a practical way. I'm going to leave that there. I was going to also talk about COP27 and its failure, and maybe I'll bring that in the summing up or in through the discussion. But let's start the discussion now.
Thank you, Rob. That was very good. Apologies for the technical problems with recording. Right, in time-honoured tradition, I will allow people to speak. So you can raise your hands in the room, and also if you want to raise your hands on Zoom, of course, please do so. I will take a mix of people in the room and on Zoom, and I will try and improve on my chairing technique in previous sessions by saying who is next up to speak. So that you can prepare yourself, and if comrades could try and speak for about 3 to 4 minutes, something like that, and introduce yourselves. That's it, name and village. Right.
There we go. Rowan, originally Bristol, I guess. Not quite a village. Yeah, fantastic from both Christine and Rob. A lot to think about there. There's sort of two different parts to my question I want to raise. The first is sort of just to raise the general issue of why ecosocialism is important, but why we don't let it just become a kind of suffix we add to socialism and sort of leave it there. I think that there's sometimes a tendency to imagine that if we had a revolution, that would just resolve all of the ecological problems. And if we do have a revolution, I hope we do very soon, we will inherit capitalist forms of distribution, and of extraction, and we'll have to, work in very difficult circumstances to alter those on a fundamental level. The other side of the question, I wanted to pick up some of the sort of prefigurative elements around the conversation of, for example, needs and abundance. And argue that we really need to change the whole frame of the argument on these questions. Shakespeare has that line, I think, in King Lear about sort of reason, not the need. These are really difficult to discuss, and what is actually a need and what isn't a need is really difficult to discuss. And that's because needs are historically defined. They emerge in historical context. That's not to say that there's no difference between a desire for a plasma screen television and for food. Obviously, there's a vast difference. But once you start to look at some of the sort of subtler differences, it becomes more and more difficult. And I think we need to reframe the whole question of abundance in terms of the kind of society we want to see, what kind of world we want to see. And that means, to some degree, a utopian frame. And we have a tradition, going back to William Morris, of ecological socialist thought that try to reconceive the way that our relationships to each other could change. And I think that that's a tradition that we really need to revive in socialist thought if we're going to appeal to people, because as critical as I am of fully automated luxury communism, there's an impulse behind it to make an ecological appeal to a mass base that I don't think is wrong-minded, even if a lot of the solutions, I think, are not particularly practical or realizable, and often over-rely on hypothetical technologies. So yeah, we need to rethink our fundamental relationships with each other, to the world, and to how abundance and happiness is created within that context, because I think we still need a vision of abundance.
Thank you. Right, I've got Alan next, and then Terry. Actually, yeah. Okay, Alan.
Yes, I'm pleased to follow. I thought the introduction was very good. I'm pleased to follow that contribution because I want to make some of the similar points. And it's about what would a future eco-socialist society look like and what changes would we have to make to get there. And I want to reinforce the point that ending capitalism will not resolve the economic crisis. It will put us in a better position to do so, but the origins of the crisis are not capitalism, they're anthropogenic. In other words, human impact on the planet that started a long time before capitalism and will continue after capitalism is gone until we as human beings reduce our impact on the planet to a level that the planet can stand. That's the problem. So first of all, I would say that it's crucial. I mean, when we're going to get rid of capitalism, we don't know. I don't think it's around the corner, but that's our aim and it's achievable. But it's important when capitalism is ended that those that have ended it have a vision of a sustainable planet. Because if they don't, we'll be back in the same situation, because a new future society has got to be entirely sustainable. And as I say, it won't be resolved by the ending of capitalism. So we will go into a post-capitalist society with the ecological crisis still there in full force, as it was at the end of capitalism. And it will still be our job to resolve the crisis. And I think that will mean, before we get there, we're going to need to know what we want. And when we get there, I think that it will still need an ecology movement, green and ecology movement, active and independent, in order to carry this through. The struggle will continue after capitalism is gone. We want capitalism to go, but it's not a silver bullet in getting rid of the crisis. So, so there are big strategic requirements in carrying through a social revolution under these conditions that is going to be sustainable. I mean, I don't know whether we actually know yet whether it is possible for it to be sustainable, but it probably is. But we need to know about it before we start to do it.
Sorry. Thank you very much for the two excellent introductions. And again, I want to build on what's already been said. I wanted to make 3 points and Alan's just made one of them for me, so I won't say more than to say I agree with him. Like all social movements, the ecological movement will need to continue after the seizure of state power. The other two things I wanted to talk about was one to say a bit more about the question of trade union work, and to say I think that this is a huge priority that the left hasn't put enough emphasis in. I think in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow, we did quite a good job of building the trade union component of the ecological movement in this country. But since then, I think it's been very much left to a smaller group of comrades in XRTU to carry on that flag. And we really need to shift that around, because unless the bastions of the labour movement understand the importance of taking on the whole environmental disaster, then they continue to reproduce productivism as part of the ideology of the labour movement. So it's not just about getting people to support installation of housing, it's getting them to think about needs in a different way. And then the second point I wanted to pick up on was to take what Rowan said about utopianism, and I think they're right that there's a very strong tradition of socialist utopianism in English political thought. I wouldn't say going back to Morris, I would say including Morris. I think there's more than Morris before and afterwards. But there's also a hugely rich tradition of utopian thought in Indigenous communities, and the concept of buen vivir, of good living, which is central to communities who have lived in harmony with planetary resources in their communities, is something that I think gives us a different vision of needs and of abundance of community and collective planning.
Thank you, Terry. Right, next is Patrick. Just talk.
Okay, yeah, I think both introductions were excellent. I'll just make a contribution really by asking a question. People were following what went on at COP27. I mean, one of the demands from many countries in the global south was a demand for climate reparations, and largely because the climate crisis was not caused by them, it was caused by the imperialist, highly industrialized countries in the global north. I think that is something that we do need to popularize more. I mean, people pay lip service to it, but I doubt if anything is really going to happen unless there is a sort of mass movement in solidarity with the global south on this question. So I'd be interested to know what the speakers have to say.
Thank you. I'm going to take myself next, and then John is after me. Yeah, I've just got like a couple of points to make around, which I know would probably be obvious to everyone in this room, but we really cannot trust the capitalist class. But I think that's worth saying because there's still so many illusions out there about the reforming capacity of the capitalists or their ability to be honest about what their companies are doing or the corporations. And I just think there's so many examples that have come out in the last few years about the way that car companies lied about their emissions. For instance, I know they got caught and they got fined for it, but they still did it. Teflon, the company made Teflon. We've all got Teflon inside us. We've all been poisoned by this company. Everyone on the planet now has got this substance inside themselves. The kind of petrochemical companies knew about climate change in the 70s and repressed the data and research on it. And even new companies that have emerged, which kind of allegedly, are meant to be trying to resolve the climate crisis, like Tesla. One of the main ways that Tesla has made money at all since its inception has not been through making these really expensive and not very good cars. It's been because of the way the US has the carbon credit system. Tesla gets millions upon millions of dollars of carbon credits every year because their company is technically kind of almost net zero carbon. And they sell the carbon credits on to General Motors and Chrysler and all the other companies. And that's how they make their money. It's only last year that they actually began to make profit from their car line, as opposed to relying on profit from selling carbon credits. And of course, Elon Musk positions himself as like, I really care about the planet, kind of, green cars are like the way forward. And that's not even talking about sort of the extractive processes and so on, like in countries of the world which go into making these things. But I think that's the sort of, that's something that we need to really talk. I think we need to have a proper understanding of the way the capitalists themselves are incapable, because of the profit mechanism, of really reforming things. Just quickly on the transition, I think one of the things that socialism will do in the early stages before we've abolished commodities is we will learn the true cost of commodities. Because obviously one of the things capitalism does is the externalities. So you make a car and obviously they factor in the metal, the minerals, the labor that goes into it. but they don't factor in the carbon emissions into it, for instance. But as part of us in an eco-socialist transition, we will do everything we can to understand the true cost of commodities, including the environmental cost on them, including like when you build a new house, when you knock down a house and build a new house, that has a carbon cost associated with it. It's not just the bricks and mortar and the labor that goes into it. So understanding that in the process of getting rid of commodities, but understanding their true value is going to be very important. And yeah, like I really agreed and liked the way that Christine and Rob articulated eco-socialism as a society of use values, you know, where we're actually producing things that we need and not just relying on the exchange value of commodities. That's obviously a key aspect of the world that we want to build. Okay, John, and then a comment on the row there.
John Devine, originally from London, then Cambridge, and now back to London. Yes, the introductions were very, very stimulating, and I think very good. My problem that I want to raise is to do with the COP process, because increasingly the outcomes of COPs have been less important, I suppose, as we've gone through the whole process. And one of the ways, or one of the strengths of the COP process was that it allowed campaigning groups from across the world to meet, to discuss, to network, basically. Now we have the last COP in Egypt, the next one's in Qatar. This whole process of networking of the eco-socialists, of the environmentalists and various other groups is coming to an end. So the question I want to put is, how do we maintain this international aspect of the environmental crisis when COP isn't working for us?
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, Dan, I'm originally from the village of Lewisham and now I'm in the village of Lambeth. But yeah, in terms of, just want to make a quick point about cars before a couple of general points. I saw some photos from the 1920s, and one thing that really struck me was that how many people were out on the streets, like socializing with each other and kids playing. And I'm not going down this kind of obviously ludicrous like golden age of the past that a lot of the right wing do. There was slums, there was, you know, lots of horrendous problems. But it did strike me how antisocial cars are and the devastating effects that they've had on human interaction and in terms of communities, because like that just doesn't happen anymore at all, other than if people live in maybe like cul-de-sacs or whatever. You don't get kids playing on streets and you don't get neighbours sitting outside and talking to each other. And if we had a if we hugely cut back on cars and had a lot more public transport and basically try to make residential places car free, and I think some places have done that. I think Amsterdam might have done it somewhere. I imagine you would then get a really positive impact in terms of how people interact with each other. And when people were talking earlier about like what's a need, well, one of the things that's a need is human interaction, and I think that makes people incredibly happy. I mean, yeah, you might get some people just like living by themselves, but most people don't. Most people thrive on human contact with other people, and capitalism creates an incredible amount of loneliness. All the statistics you see in terms of where people, in terms of, and creates an incredible amount of depression. And the answer is to just give pills to people. And I'm not saying antidepressants don't work, but they kind of gloss over what is actually causing a lot of sadness and depression. And it's in a lot of cases that people are totally alienated and very lonely a lot of the time. And turning into why we need socialism, I think, you know, we need as socialists to inject a sense of urgency and boldness in terms of what needs to happen. I mean, you know, obviously it can't happen if COP28 or 9 or whatever is in Qatar, but if when they're in places that movements can access, we need to kind of rebuild the spirit of the anti-capitalist movement in the early 2000s. You know, there needs to be a siege of these summits of like hundreds of thousands of people, trade unionists, socialists, like anyone who's interested in saving the future of the planet. Because you saw what people were prepared to do under the COVID lockdown when people thought there was an emergency. You know, people were prepared to take, you know, can argue about what measures were and weren't necessary, but, you know, there were huge changes to people's lives. And yet global warming is going to kill hugely more people than COVID. You know, you're talking about hundreds of millions of deaths, potentially billions of people, you know, having to become like ecological migrants. And I think one of the things, I'll leave it here, is that as socialists, we do have to have a boldness. It's not just enough to say, you know, we have this reform, we need that reform. We have to articulate why the whole system needs to change, and it needs to change quite quickly. You know, we haven't got 20, 30, 40 years. Capitalism has to end in the next decade, probably, you know, in terms of to stop a lot of this from happening. So hopefully, in terms of anti-capitalist resistance and other groups, we can kind of get socialists to kind of take some of the boldness that the environmental groups that are taking, like XR, because I think it's a shame that it's just being left to kind of groups of XR when socialist groups should be doing some of those things themselves.
Could you pass the microphone down to that comrade there? And then, comrade, after you finish, could you pass the microphone down? I'm trying to do checkers here. I'm trying to.
Control freak.
Oh yeah, fine, yeah. I'm sharing the meeting, Pete. Yeah, sorry.
I'm Robin. I'm born in Geneva, Switzerland. Joined the Fourth International in 1968 in Switzerland, and kind of hoped for a socialist revolution ever since. It's a bit in that context that I want to raise an uncomfortable question, really. As global warming is happening very rapidly, it's an emergency, and really humanity needs to tackle it now. And I'm not that optimistic. I really thought we'd have a socialist revolution within years after 1968, and it didn't happen. And I'm not optimistic. I mean, 10 years is actually too long, because we should be tackling it now. And I think it's very true that the capitalists at the moment and up till now aren't doing it effectively. They do little things, but not on the scale that's needed. And you know, are very disingenuous, as you've been explaining very clearly. And but that doesn't mean that as the crisis gets greater, they won't suddenly wake up. I mean, if they don't, personally, I think we'll be one of the thousands of the species made extinct. And then talking about socialism is a bit hopeless. So I really think that we need to unite. I still have the socialist dream. I think we all should, in overthrowing capitalism. But I think we have to unite with people who are prepared to fight against global warming, who don't yet see the connection with capitalism. And if we make a precondition to abolishing climate change or reversing it to overthrow capitalism, then you know we risk to have a very pessimistic outcome and not achieve it. And so I really think ACR should be joining every ecological movement and not, you know, still argue the case for overthrowing capitalism, but not arguing that that's a precondition to achieving the reversal of climate change.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how want and need are being used interchangeably. In fact, in Market and Simon, which I work with, it's the same sign. And the same perception of people, what they think they need and what they actually need is very different quite often. Because as people said about advertisement and all that kind of thing, I think Rob mentioned that. And the thing about it, the other thing is that the majority of people who think they need those things are in the West, and this is the majority of a small minority of the population of the world, but it is the majority of the people of the world that use and consume and make a difference in the same time. But also the majority, the proportion of the world is less affected by the global warming. So the challenge here is that to get the people who are not affected to see, you can say to change without actually having suffering those things, the result of those things. Thank you.
The comrades at the back there.
You've been made redundant.
With no money.
My name is Barry. I used to work at Houseman's, so I used to see on Neil around. I just want to ask a question about strategy. So, Labour Party, anti-capitalist, refused to take part in NUPES, partly because I think because they allowed the party socialists to join. I think these kind of left eco fronts are possibly the only avenue in probably any country right now. And I'm wondering what people's thoughts on that here, whether there should be some kind of left eco front around an affirmative program, because basically all socialist currents and tendencies in this country seem to be outflanked by activist groups who are doing some really good things, just stop oil, etc. But then maybe we need to go beyond that. I think we all agree to that. So it's about strategy, about left eco front, about maybe if Christine could talk a bit about why they disagreed with NUPES, I'd like to hear about that.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, the next speaker is going to be Big New. I'm going to unmute you. Oh no, you're already unmuted.
Hi. Yes, I'd like to bring in the COP 15 taking place 7th of December to the 21st, and that's talking about all the things to do with climate change, but also pollution, waste pollution, and production, following up the saving of nature, the seas, and targets for saving land, soil, rivers, and other things that we are still dealing with in a separate way from climate change, when the two are actually integrated. So, and that goes back to the original ideas of Marx about the metabolic rift and the soil. And that's something that eco-socialists, we need to go back to and educate the green movement away from the greenwashing that goes on at COP 26, 27, where there was 1,000 people alone, delegates from the fossil fuel capitalism, if not more, one country, the UEA, which is actually hosting the next COP 28, not Qatar, it's United UEA. So if we're going to be working across the world, we do have to stick with the mobilizations around the COPs, even though in the Fourth International, actually, articles by Daniel Tanuro, he's calling it greenwashing. And of course, that is the main thing that we are confronted with, fighting an alternative to greenwashing. And so our slogan should be about growth for need, not profit, in harmony with nature and tackling the metabolic rift that exists under the Anthropocene. And the Eco-Socialist Alliance is obviously working on that. But we have to expand that, both locally, from the bottom up, and across the globe, because the Eco-Socialist Alliance here in this country is very weak. Even though many left groups publish pamphlets and books on it, they still exist in a rather sectarian fashion. So there's a lot of work to do working along with the green movements and XR that we as ACR need to prioritize in all our work, as has been said before. And I hope that that will be a focus for us in our eco-socialist campaigns in the future and across all our campaigns. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got this comrade here, then that comrade at the back. I've got Jeff online. Have I missed anyone? Has anyone put their hand up and I've ignored you? Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll take the two comrades in the room, then we've got Jeff, and then we'll take back the two speakers, I think, to conclude, because then I think the speakers will get, you know, about 5 to 7 minutes each. Okay, that sound good?
Okay, Pete from Kilburn. I won't say village of Kilburn because that's in Yorkshire. I wanted to sort of follow on in a way from what Barry was saying, because I can agree with everything that's been said about the need for eco-socialism and the need for eco-socialist revolution, but very little has been said about strategy, about how we get there, how we build, if you like, how we build a fight to get there. And that seems to be sort of a crucial element missing from the discussion, most of the discussion. And, you know, sort of, you're left with the feeling, our comrades, I'm not saying comrades are saying that, but you could be left with the feeling that comrades are saying, well, you know, in time-honoured far left fashion in Britain, we put out materials saying where we stand and sort of people will come to us. You know, a strategy to be avoided as far as possible, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it was touched on in a way by Alan this morning when he talked about Labour's Green or Starmer and Green New Deal. I mean, I don't quite agree with how Alan characterised Starmer's position, but it does raise questions like, do we demand that Starmer does the good bits of his programme, or do we simply say, well, you know, social democracy is a pile of shit and Starmer's a right-wing scumbag, we walk away from it? And I think, you know, questions like that are crucial to how we get from today to where we want to be. So hopefully sort of people can, maybe in their summings up, address a bit more about strategies raised by sort of Barry in relation to France. Not that I know much about that aspect of things, but you know, that is as crucial to me as spelling out the need for eco-socialism.
Yeah.
Cheers, Michael Chesham. I'm from a village called Edinburgh, though I've lived in various villages across London for 15 years. I suppose some guys have spoken a bit about utopia, and I was wondering if there's also a case for talking about dystopia and dystopian visions, in the sense that, I don't know, in popular culture, dystopias function as this kind of warning from the future of a world that you have to avoid. And while obviously the most pertinent task for Marxists in the current moment is to prevent climate change, to a great extent we can't. And we are going to be living in a form of dystopia, in that climate dystopia, pretty soon. And I think it's worth thinking about, and I often think we don't think enough about what that does to our politics and about the political questions that that will throw up. There'll be a lot of new dividing lines, and there'll be a lot of different issues that we have to confront. I think that one that's been raised already, and you know, is just a good example, is migration. I mean, I remember I was speaking at the Labour campaign for free movement a couple was in this room actually a few months ago, and I was asked the question, well, what's the, obviously we need to talk about freedom to move and freedom to stay. People need to, we need global development to reach such a point where people can stay wherever they are and they don't have to move. And unfortunately, that is now outdated. I mean, to an extent, we should still talk about freedom to move and freedom to stay. Obviously, forced migration is always bad, but in a matter of years, there are going to be billions of climate refugees, and hundreds of billions of them are going to die on the way. And that's going to do something absolutely shocking to our to politics in the West. So I think we need to think about how to cope with, I really don't want to come across as fatalistic or as, as doom mongering, but nonetheless, I think we do have to think about what it's going to be like to inhabit those dystopias, and what we need to grapple with, and how radical we will need to be in that moment. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Jeff, you're up next. I'll spotlight you.
I'm Jeff. I live in a village called Brynaman in Carmarthenshire in southwest Wales, or Cymru. Because I think, taking up what Pete's actually raised, we do have the experience of the Welsh government, which has attempted in a way to set out a very good policy on the environment. Unfortunately, like Starmer, it also goes along with nuclear power, but that is, that's only a weakness. But nevertheless, much of what the government in Cardiff has been attempting to do, I think we should support and welcome. But there are problems around it, particularly, for example, the move to make the de facto speed limit in Cymru 20 miles an hour. That has certainly been opposed in many places. The government, I think, is at least attempting to discuss with people, which is a sensible thing to do, rather than just impose its views. But one of the key problems is that the government of Cymru does not control its own funds. So it can have very ambitious programs, around retrofitting housing, around getting rid of oil, which is many parts of Cymru rely upon oil, not quite to the same extent as the north of Ireland, but I'm sure there are rural areas in England and Scotland as well where oil is a major source of heating. We also rely very much more on private cars because transport doesn't exist. Now, certainly Carmarthenshire has been building a number of electric buses, but there's going to be nowhere near enough to meet all the transport needs of Carmarthenshire. And, the finances will not be there. And just slightly change the subject to a different concept, really, of environmentalism. One of the key problems in Cymru, especially in the north of Wales, but also Pembrokeshire, is second homes, which fundamentally change the nature of areas of the country. Now, I know there are second home problems in Cornwall, probably in the Lake District, in parts of Yorkshire, where in Whitby Council took quite a good decision, I think, on restricting the use of second homes. But that does fundamentally change the situation in parts of Cymru, which isn't just about newcomers coming in, but it actually prevents the indigenous people of areas from speaking their own language, because Welsh disappears as a language in many of these villages and small towns because of the homes being bought up by outsiders who therefore force younger people to have to leave those areas. So let's look taking a very broad view of environmental issues. But and just to finish, say last weekend at its AGM in Dodd, which is important revolutionary socialist organisation in Cymru, decided to call itself eco-socialist, which a year previously I'd had quite a battle about that, and there was opposition. This time it went through very, very easily. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Right, that brings us to the end of our speakers list. Just before I bring back Rob and Christine, just to say that talk of strategy is obviously very important. We are, as an organisation, Anti-Capitalist Resistance, in our pre-conference periods. We are having a conference in, is it February or March? March, thank you very much, March next year. And one of the key documents obviously will be one on eco-socialism, specifically looking at strategy, surveying the political terrain in terms of what social movements there are, political organisations, alliances, and so on, and trying to really play a positive role in developing that movement and bringing it together where it can. And I very much agree with Barry's point that the social movements are important, but we also need political solutions which are kind of trying to shift things like more fundamentally. So if you haven't joined Anti-Capitalist Resistance yet, if the thought of taking part in those internal discussions excites you, then please do speak to myself, or you can go online. We'll obviously email everyone who came to the conference a link to joining online as well. We'd love to have you as members. So without further ado, I'll start with Rob actually, and then Christine to finish off.
Okay, thanks everybody. That's a really good discussion, and there were quite a lot of sort of fairly direct questions that I can answer, but with my own views now from the discussion, mostly around COP27, I think, which is good. But first, just to start on the question of utopianism, I'm all in favour of utopias. I think utopias can be ideas that can actually mobilise people and inspire people. One of the issues I took with fully automated luxury communism, which does put forward a fantastic vision, was that certainly in Aaron Bastani's formulation of it in his book, it's all about techno fixes really, and it also strips away any idea of agency. It's all just the technology itself. It's technologically determinist to my mind. There's some great ideas in it. I mean, I'm probably in a minority within ACR of agreeing with the ideas around universal basic income. It's within that, and I think that's it's good. So yes, I'm in favour of utopias, but I'm in favour of practical utopias, if that makes any sense. On Alan's point about ending capitalism will not end the crisis, absolutely it won't. But one of the things about ending capitalism is it breaks the cycle, it breaks the cycle of commodity production, the anarchy of the market, the idea that we don't have control over what we produce and whatever. So it at least it breaks that, and then it gives us the opportunity to start to try to heal things and make things better. And I take the point that the old Soviet bloc, whether you call them degenerated workers' states or whether you take a different position, I'm quite agnostic on that. They were no better in many ways than capitalism, but we have to bear in mind that they were operating in a world in which capitalism was dominant, and so that in whatever way replicated many of the features of capitalism within that state, as I say, whether you consider it to be workers' state or state capitalism. Moving on to the questions around COP27, Patrick talked about the reparations that came out of COP27. It's a great, actually, it's something pushing for quite a while. A movement of resources from the global north to the global south is something we absolutely have to be in favour of. The two problems with it are, first of all, there's no real mechanism to enforce it. This has always been the problem with COP. Nice ideas, but no compulsion on states to actually, honour these agreements. But it's there, and it's something that we need to absolutely agitate that to happen. But again, reparations. The question of reparations is against mitigation, or it's closing the stable door after the horse has bolted, and we need to maintain a focus on making sure that we stop global warming now, we keep the oil in the ground, etc. Dan mentioned the movement, and it's absolutely true that the movement around COP27 was not even a shadow of the movement around COP26 in Glasgow. We didn't have those street mobilizations. The coalition that we built around COP26 seems to have fallen apart. And it's not just, you know, because Sharm el-Sheikh's difficult to get to, it's in a repressive regime. And if we wait until there's a COP in a more user-friendly and easily accessible location, that everything will be fine. No, we didn't have mass mobilizations in London, New York, and around the world this time. They would have had an impact as much as a mobilization physically in Sharm el-Sheikh. If we'd had 100,000 or 1 million people on the streets of London, that would have had an impact. We didn't have that. And I think we have to look at the movement and see there has been a certain demobilization and demoralization within that. And it's not helped by people like Greta Thunberg and George Monbiot and sections of Extinction Rebellion saying boycott COP. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, you're going to get a shit outcome from COP if you don't actually try to mobilize around it and be visible and fight around it. So yeah, we don't need to wait until COP's next in a good place to fight around it. But there is one thing out of this that I think is really, really important, is that Lula's called for the COP after next to be held in Brazil, in the Amazon. And I think that that is a demand we should run with. We should absolutely foreground that demand, you know, in the next couple of years. That would be brilliant. Even, and if it doesn't happen that there's a COP there and they give the COP to somewhere awful, there should be a counter COP within the Amazon. You know, there should be something like, you know, a counter summit there. I think that would be something that we could mobilize around, and we could get a resonance, and we could start to pull together the groups, the nations, the NGOs, the radical left within the COP process that actually want to fight, and give them something to mobilize around there. Finally, Robin's point about do we only want to unite with other eco-socialists and fight? Absolutely not. You know, within the COP process, it's very, very wide-ranging. We need to be within it. We need to be raising our eco-socialist program, our eco-socialist demands. But, you know, Trotsky said, in the fight against fascism, I'll unite with the devil and his grandma. Well, you know, in the fight against climate change, I'll unite with Vickers and liberals and disgruntled Tories like Alok Sharma, of the, you know, who chaired COP26 and seems now to be thoroughly pissed off with the fact that everything's been wound back. But in uniting with them, I'm not going to take on board any of their program whatsoever. You know, we have a common interest as human beings in preventing the climate and the planet from being trashed. Within that, we have different ideas about how to do it, but we march together as far forward as we possibly can, and we only split where we absolutely have to. I'll leave that there. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, Christine, let me find you.
Yes. Well, lot of questions, and sometimes a little bit difficult to hear very well the question. So I hope I will do my best. Well, first thing, I want to come back on the problem of productivism and Stalinism. Well, I think more than, well, of course, Stalinism was productivist, but it's not only this. I think that workers' movement in the 20th century was, well, mainly dominated by the idea that, well, progress in technical progress and production and social progress are working together, and in something which would be the sense of history, going forward with more and more progress on technical point of view, more and more production to share, and more socialism and well-being. And we have to break with that, because it was it's very comfortable to think that you are in the sense of history. The socialism cannot not arrived. It's something written in the history. It's a sense of history as that, and it's very difficult to break with that. To say, well, okay, it's going to be a little bit more difficult because so-called progress is a destructive progress and destructive production. I don't know if it's a good way to say it, but well, and that's a very, very fundamental change, I think. Well, it's another discussion to know what was in Marx and not, and so on and so forth, but I'm not going to have this discussion now. But what is important for us, I think, is that the moment where the workers' movement, social democracy or Stalinism was very, very strong, and they were productivist. And well, I think that's something very, very important. So that's the reason why we need to say eco-socialism, because otherwise we will not be understood. Okay? Well, I hope it's clear. Something about needs. What are real needs? I say social needs, human needs, and things like that. Well, I love the way Miguel Louis, and I love Miguel Louis, of course, but the way he said, one way to know what are real needs is to suppress advertising, which is just creating, well, a huge waste of energy and so on. But it's a fantastic creation of false needs and make you think that you do need this new phone, car, and so on and so forth. So, well, suppress advertising would be a good way to know what is useful or not, what do we need. The other thing I think is the link between social inequality, the way of life of the richest is very, very, very destructive. Well, we had this summer, we had in France something about jets, which are planes going very fast. They are private planes. We say jet. I don't know if it's the same word in English. So, and the discussion about how they burn fossil fuels with that, and comparing with and about mega fires and why we eat extreme heat waves, and at the same time they do use their jet. So, but it's not only that, it's the way of life, the model, are coming from the richest and going into the old society. And I think that all what is suppressing this absolutely incredible way of life of very huge luxury, incredible. Well, it's something quite important too. And it's also the way to make the link between climate justice and social justice. I want, well, something about, well, to be it's difficult to be optimistic when one camera say I'm not an optimist. Well, it's difficult to be, and well, of course we have a matter of emergency. We have to change now, but we have to change deeply in a revolutionary way, and in the same time we have to say the truth. That we have to break with capitalism, because without breaking with capitalism, there is no solution. But we know that's not enough just to say that, to convince. So we have together to say the truth because it has to be said, and we have to build the condition to go to move toward the revolution, to move toward the and of course we can think it's going to take too long. It would be too long. But there is no short way to do it. But it doesn't mean that we have to make a precondition of, well, if you are not eco-socialist or anti-capitalist, we cannot join together to fight. No, of course it's not. And it's very important. I didn't take time to develop the demands and how we can have immediate demands, which are very, very important. And well, of course, we have all the main mobilization are against extractivist projects. And of course, we are just building this mobilization with all those who want to do it. And my only experience on victory is the fight against the airport of Notre-Dame-des-Landes. And it was a very, very broad alliance between the more reformist and people with big faith in institution and to break with the project. And they had a lot of official demarche to us, to Europe and to all the institutions you can imagine in one way. And on the other way, you had what we call zadistes, which are those who occupy and well, very radical activists. And between that, you had a huge mobilization, very popular, and it's the all together which allow us to win. And I think that's the point. We need such a broad mobilization, but joining the more reformist to the more radical. I think. And then we have also, I think, some victories we can have. For instance, we are very involved in mobilization about free public transport, which, well, we have to break with the car, and electric cars are not the solution, of course, but it's all the town and all the organization of the territories are organized with the car, destroying public transport and organizing all the life with suppression of public services, with a very big, how call it, big market, supermarket at the periphery of the town, and destroying it. Well, it's not possible to buy something to eat in the center of a lot of small town. So you have to use your car just to buy bread. So it's incredible. So we have to fight against that, but we have also to have, well, some concrete proposition which makes the life better, with public transport free, well, and trying to make it together. Well, the question about, because I think I have to answer this question about why NPA didn't join NUPES. First of all, we had this discussion seriously with we wanted to have this unity because the proposition of the FE was something very good and very, very different from what has been done 5 years before, where it was a very, well, we are the France Insoumise and we don't want to make unity with nobody. And when they offer the NPA to participate to the campaign, we say yes, and we want to do that. But in this moment, well, in fact, they make the choice to have the Parti Socialiste, which is a socially liberal party who was in the government just before and which made the situation very, very difficult for workers and so on, then destroying social protection and all that. So it was difficult to be in the same group than Parti Socialiste. But we support the candidates of France Insoumise, and we work with everywhere it's possible. Everywhere it's you have real united groups to work together. We go there, and we think it's very important, very different to have well, something a bloc left with which is dominated by France Insoumise, which is an anti-liberal, anti-neoliberal. It's very different than when the left was dominated by neoliberal and socially liberal. It was different. So we have to take that in account, and we do. And I have to say that we have to remark and to notice that, and it's very important that the program of France Insoumise makes very strongly make the link between social and ecological justice, and actually it put in the center of the program the issue of ecology, and that's a big progress and a big break with the productivism of what is Parti Communiste and Parti Socialiste in France, and that's a progress we have to notice. I just wanted to end with advertising, maybe, just to say that well, I am a member of NPA, but also member of Force International, and we are beginning a huge reflection to have a global eco-socialist manifest. And in this manifest, we have a part which is, for me, very important, which is the word we fight for. And I think we have, and in all the discussion we have about eco-socialism, we have a part of discussion about this issue, the word we want, the word we fight for, and because we need to have a perspective, to have something positive, to have the idea that, well, there is an alternative and it's possible to change the world and it's possible to have a better life. And I just wanted to make the link with what Terry said, I think, about living the way we can fulfill this idea of what would be a good living, because of course it's something very important for indigenous people, but we cannot just take the meaning. Well, we have to put our own and collective and global sense of this perspective. But yes, we want good living for all. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Christine. That was very good. Thank you to all of the speakers at the throughout all of the events this weekend, and also everyone who attended, contributed. Just a quick few things. There is, if you're in the hall, there is a bookstall at the back. Fred will happily sell you some Marxist propaganda and also agitational material. We have there is a big strike of nurses on the 15th of December. First national nurses strike since 1988, I think it is, something like that. It's a big one. So we will be mobilizing around that, going to picket lines. We'll be producing leaflets and other material for comrades and supporters to hand out there. There is food at the back. Again, this is people in the hall, not people on Zoom, sorry. Please take a bagel or any other food that you want with you. Donations are gratefully accepted, but at this point, I think if you just want to take them, then you can. And as I said before, we're a new organization. We've only been around for a couple of years. This is our first big kind of event that we've tried to organize. Yes, we want to encourage people to join, or at least be supporters, like stay in touch with us. If you want to give us some money as a donation, of course we will happily accept that. We have approached capitalists. They have so far refused to fund us. I think it might be a branding problem with the name, but we can talk about that. Anyway, thank you everyone for coming. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Christine. Au revoir.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Those capitalists, they have no sense of humor, Simon. Oh, God.
Tom, can you save the chat second?
Yeah, I've got it saved here.
Okay, good. Oh, my heater is packed up, so I'm going to crawl under a blanket. I'll see you. Oh.
Hi, Bob. Is he gone? Yes, probably.